Thanks a lot for joining me for another episode of Mortal Realms Monday. This week I am painting the Lord Arcanum on Gryph Charger from issue 20 of the Mortal Realms magazine. So without further ado, let's get to it. Right, so first of all, going to take some Flayed One flesh, and I've gone ahead and primed the model with a just a regular grey primer, and I'm going to apply this flesh tone over or this pale yellow tone all over the flesh areas of the Gryph Charger. For this one I decided, rather than going for the generic dark coloured Gryph Charger that appears on the box art or the one that they show in the Mortal Realms magazine, I'm going for a more parrot-like macaw type colours. So the reds and yellows, along with the sort of a little bit of blue hint to them, and then more pinkish skin. I think if we get any more Gryph Chargers, I'm not sure if we get any more with future magazines, but I'll then change the colours around just so I've got a bit of variety in the army. But anyway, the Flayed One flesh I'm applying to obviously the legs, avoiding the feathers. Also along the tail, right up until the tail hair at the end, and also the top of the Gryph Charger's head and any flesh area on his back, just below the back of his neck feathers. So you can see just up along here and the side around his eye and that. So once that's done, I'll then move on to the next step, which will be blending up some of those pinks into this Flayed One flesh. So we'll be back in just a bit, where we can see how I went about doing that. Okay, so next up I'm going to take some pink horror and thin this down to a wash consistency, and I'm now going to use this to shade in all the recessed areas of the Gryph Charger, as well as give a little bit of a stain towards some of the more raised up areas. In hindsight, I may not have needed to do this, as I do change my mind a little later on after this step as to how I wanted to go about doing this. But this may have helped towards that later step. But as I said, it's just a case of me going over all the flesh areas with this wash, concentrating it more towards the claws and the lower left ankle. So on the back legs here, obviously starting at the top and then concentrating it a little bit more down towards the bottom, but just letting it sit heavily in those recesses. Now I've noticed that with the size of this model, I couldn't fit it all into the camera space that I have between the lens on the camera and my work surface. So I've ordered a camera arm mount for my desk, which I'm hoping will come within the next few days. So in future, any larger models, I'll be able to get the camera much further up out of the way and then just zoom in and crop. That way I'm not having areas go, outside of the camera frame, and I'm not trying to cram myself in under a camera to paint this up, so I'll get much better painting results. But what we'll do, we'll now jump ahead and just take a look at how this looks once this step is finished, and then I can explain what I went with for the next step. Okay, so with that done, I decided that I wanted this to be a little bit more opaque and darker towards the bottom. So from the hoof to the first sort of joint area, and to about halfway down the tail, or up the tail rather, I wanted a darker, more, like I said, more saturated pink area, and then the Flayed One flesh to use as more of a highlight. Having the Flayed One flesh as the undertone may have helped this pink appear a little brighter rather than if I'd gone with the grey. However, like I said, I probably could have got away with skipping the flayed one flesh to start and just going in with this, but this was the way that I did it, so this is the obviously the result that I end up with. So obviously I'm just going over everything I've already done just on that lower half to darken it up, and then sort of flatten out those top surfaces a little bit more. This is slightly thin, but not as thin as I originally had it for the wash. Okay, so once I was happy with that, you can still see some of the flayed one flesh, which is why I think that it was worth me keeping it under there, or it was good that I did put it under there. What I'm now doing is going back over the raised areas with a glaze, or a thin layer of the flayed one flesh again, to sort of bring that back up a little bit towards that warmer, yellower flesh colour. You'll notice on the front legs that I've left the top sort of front side of the legs, or the claws, the lighter colour, and then the underside is the darker, more pinkish look. So obviously I went back over this a few times, building this up. As you can see, it was going on very thin, just so that I could get a nice transition from that darker pink at the bottom to this more paler yellowish pink as it became more of the body. With this model, I did mention in the magazine review that although it's a nice model to look at, the sculpt of it just felt a little bit cheap. The underside of it was just flat plastic, so I just went in with some green stuff myself and just modelled a very bad version of chest feathers going down the front of the chest, just to give a bit of texture under there, which you'll see later on. But for now, we'll jump on to the next step and take a look at how I go about darkening the bottom of the legs up further. Okay, so next up, Screamer Pink. Obviously this is again going darker. Because of the way that I decided to work with this, I ended up doing my dark glazes over lighter glazes instead of the other way round. Personally, I don't see any difference in the result, so it doesn't matter too much. But as I mentioned earlier, this is going to be from the bend in the ankle joint there, just at the top of where I'm doing now, down to the hooves, and again that's going to fade gradually from the bottom as it becomes that pink at the top into that flayed one flesh. So again, slightly thinned down to get a nice transition between the two, and obviously that sits nicely into the recesses at the bottom as well. And then I'll go in and do the same with the front legs. I'll apply this again to the under area, keeping it dark underneath, and then gradually getting lighter as it rolls around to the top of the front claws. And then with the tails, you can see I start about here and then pull off toward the end of the tail where I want it to be darkest. And obviously with this being super thin down, more like a glaze, I can build these transitions up and get it to become darker and darker with each successive layer as we get more towards the tip of the tail. So just going through the bottom of the arm now, and like I said, blending that in, layering it up, and just keeping more of a darker, not so much a shadow, this is actually the skin tone that I wanted, so that it's got this darker area underneath and gets lighter on the top. I did consider having it the other way round and then having a complete light underbody, but I just wasn't too happy with the way that the underbody looked, and I'd already sculpted the feathers there, so I decided to have the lighter colour on the top. and then that way I could have the lighter colour on top of the body as well, where the rider would be, where the rider is sitting. Right, so just doing the same thing around the eyes here, just darkening up that lower area, and the sort of the nostrils, on top of the nostrils around the beak there, and then leaving the skull area and the brow with that lighter pink. And then obviously the same, I blend this just into the feathers slightly, so that when I do the feathers over the top, that obviously you've got the gaps between feathers on as they feather out. You've got the skin that you can see below it, and I wanted that to be slightly darker pink. So again, just going in and sort of applying this into some of the recesses to darken it up a little bit, and just getting the transition and the opacity that I want. Okay, so now going back in with the pink horror, and I think I mixed in a little bit of the flayed one flesh in this to lighten it up slightly. And this is obviously going to be the transition down into the lighter colours, or the darker colours, sorry. But this was applied only on the sort of the most raised upper parts of the muscle definition. And again, this is very thin down, just to get some smooth transitions there. You can see it's barely noticeable that the paint is going on, but when doing glazes and layering, this is what you want. You want it to be slightly visible as it applies, and then as it dries it's barely noticeable, and that's how you build up your layers. Just step back ever so slightly with each successive layer, pulling the brush up to where you want the majority of the paint deposited, and that way you'll get nice smooth transitions. Okay, so back in with the pink horror, and just highlighting over those darker screamer pink areas, just some very fine edge highlighting now. Again, slightly thinned down. This isn't glaze consistency now, this is slightly thicker than I was using before, just so I can get a bit of an edge highlight there. But it's not so out of the pot that it leaves a harsh line. I do prefer to use slightly thinned down paints, as it gives a softer edge as the water evaporates and the paint is left, which is really nice for soft edged highlights. So just touching up on all the details, the little bumps and ridges and texture from the muscle and bone and stuff, and that's on the ankles and that here. Right, once all of that is done with the highlights and that, I next take some Carberg Crimson Shade, and I run this into all of the recesses for the darker area, so where that the screamer pink is, just to darken it up a little bit more in there and put a little bit more definition, push those shadows right back into the creases a little bit more, and that just makes the highlights and that pink stand out a little bit more. So I'm not going completely mad over the whole area. This is just sort of into the recesses, and obviously where the recesses are a little bit too small to get the brush in, then I'll just pull that across the flat surface just to get it to sit in there. But I'm not using this to so much glaze over the surface. It is just for recess shading on this. Obviously just blending it up into the little bit too much pulled at the top there. I'm just trying to blend that up into the other colour, just so we get a little bit more shadow up in there. With the front legs here, there's a lot more smaller texture and details that's just you just can't sort of touch a brush to. So this area does get a little bit more of a general application rather than a refined dotting in. But again, I do keep it to the underside, and then I just come up slightly around the sides with it. But the majority of it, like I said, this is a shade. This is designed for the shadows, so this just goes into all those recesses. And then obviously just around the feathers as they become more the skin tone, on obviously both sides of the body here, and then down into the eye sockets, around the wrinkles of the eyes, just to bring those wrinkles out a lot more. And you can see straight away that just makes that really pop out. Obviously around the nose, get into the nostril. Alright, and now back to the flayed one flesh, and this time I'm going to dry brush this over the mainly the top half here, just sort of a slightly circular motion, just to give a little bit of highlight over the top of the legs. I do pull this slightly down onto the Screamer Pink base. This is very, very lightly. Barely any paint on the brush, sorry, on the bristles, just so I can just pick off some of those extreme highlights and just blend everything together. Okay, so now it's time to move on to the feathers themselves, and for this I take some Mephiston Red, and I'm just going to apply this, as I said, over all of the feathers. Now I wanted the feathers to go from reds to oranges and yellows as they came further away from the skin. So obviously I focus this more around the elbow joint here, and the front of the neck, the plume underneath his chin and down the front, as well as the entire underside of his body. Like I said, I modelled that in with some green stuff putty, just to give an impression of feathers. It's not the best look ever, but it is what it is. It looks better than the flat plastic that was there. Obviously parts of the material here are also done in the Mephiston Red. We have some of the cloth that goes around and over the top is red, so obviously I did that again with the Mephiston just to tie that in. I was a little bit worried about it being the same colour as the feathers, but once the yellow goes over the top on the outer edge, that separates the two fine, and it looks, you know, it looks okay. Alright, so for the next step between the feathers, obviously I wanted to go from red to orange, so I'm now taking a 50-50 mix of Mephiston Red and Ariel Yellow, as I don't actually own a Citadel Red, orange, sorry. I do own another brand, but I didn't have that to hand, and you know, this way it shows you guys that you can make colours, you know, from just some primary colours. You don't have to have every paint out there, you can mix up your own. So obviously I'm just picking out the outside feathers here. These are also the ones that I want to be more yellow, but it is better to go with that orange undertone rather than trying to put yellow over the top of red. Yellow does not have a great coverage, it's not great with opacity, So if you can get a better colour underneath it first, then you know, that makes life a lot easier when it comes to applying the yellow. But as I said, this will be for the outer edge, so the larger feathers on the elbows here, I suppose you could call them, as well as the centre area of that front plumage. I wanted to go from a red outside, like I said, where the skin is, and then going more yellow towards the outside edge of the feathers. So you can see under the body here where I textured in some of that the feathers with the putty. All I did for that was just laid down a very thin layer of green stuff to cover the plastic, and then with a small piece of green stuff, I then pinched pieces off that left a sort of triangle type poke to them, and then just placed them overlapping each other, working from the front towards the back. Sorry, the back towards the front. So I would put a row down, and then over the top of that, slightly off them, and then overlapping those, I'd put the next row, and you know, I would just step that up and build it up until I came to the front of the chest. That way the feathers overlap as though they are coming straight down from the front and then going down under the body. Had I been, you know, if I were a better sculptor, then I may be able to model them straight into some putty or something, which, you know, may have been easier. Or I would have preferred to maybe sculpt more of a muscle tone and then had it more of the flesh tone under there. But you know, I know what my skill level is, and when it comes to modelling, it's a 0. 1 at a push. So yeah, I just threw down some feathers and painted them. They're not overly visible with the model, unless you tip the model backwards and look under. Basically, I just did them just so I could get some colour under there. You know, just so when it's on the tabletop, you don't have this flat piece of colour underneath. There is a little bit of texture there. So you can see here, I'm just marking out where the orange feathers and then the yellow feathers will be, and they just sort of change colour as they come further out towards the outside edge. And then the same with the underside. That's just down the centre, more focused towards the chest is the more yellows, and then as it gets further away from there, it becomes oranges, and then down into the reds. So we'll jump on ahead, and we'll be back in just a tick with the next stage of this. Right, and next up, some Uriel yellow, and as I said, this is going to be now for the lightest part of the feathers, as well as some highlight on the orange ones. You can see I'm just on the highlights here. I'm just picking off the edges, and then with the more yellow ones, I tend to do it almost like small lines, very very fine, close together lines along the feather, just to give that more fluffy type feather look. And I just want to say at this point, if you are still watching, thanks a lot. You know, it does mean a lot to me that you guys are enjoying the videos. If you are enjoying this one, hit that thumbs up just at the bottom of the screen there. And if you're not already subscribed, please consider hitting that subscription button. Obviously, I have new videos go up every Monday for Mortal Realms Monday, focusing on the Mortal Realms magazine, as well as now an Indomitus series focusing on Warhammer 40k, the Indomitus set, and then I'll probably expand that further into the Warhammer 40k universe and models and things like that. So let's with that said, let's move on to the next step and see where we go from here. Okay, so next up, I take some Incubi Darkness, and this is going to be the base colour for the claws and the hooves, as well as the beak, the horns, and the tail hair at the end of the tail, and the sort of the hair fluffy bits at the the ankles and the backs of the legs, and the plates on the front of the front legs. Now, whilst obviously I'm doing this here, there was a step just before this that I thought I had picked up in the camera, but it turns out that it was slightly off shot, so I've skipped that in the edit here. But all it was is just some more Caribou Crimson, and as you can see on the cloth area there, I just ran that into the recesses just to give some shadow and definition within that cloth. So all of that red robe area, or whatever it's called, that was just Caribou Crimson in there. So as you can see, I just give a couple of coats of this over all of the tail area here, and then just sort of blend that a little bit down into the skin area. Not too much, just to give the impression that it doesn't go straight, you know, cut off and then stuck on. You know, that it does go from that flesh, and then it's got some of the hairs growing out of it. So we'll jump on to the next step and apply some highlights to this Inky by Darkness. Okay, so for a highlight to Inky by Darkness, I love Sotek Green. I think it's a great complement colour to it. So pretty much whenever I use Inky by Darkness, I will use Sotek Green with it. What I'm doing here is damped dry brushing. So this is obviously I'm dipping into the Sotek Green, and just removing some of the excess by dabbing the bristles onto the wet palette on a spare area. And what this does is lets that colour sink into some of the recesses on the tips, which is where I want it to become lightest, and then it gives a little bit more of a dry brush as it touches the more raised up areas and doesn't sit down into them. So it's just to give a bit of a nice blend up from that Inky by Darkness into a little bit more of that Sotek Green tone on the tips of the feathers here, hair here. Not sure what you would call it at the end of the tail, but that section. And of course, if you're going to use Sotek Green, then Arcanum Blue is a great fine highlight colour to complement that, at least in my opinion. You'll notice on the hooves and the claws here that I went in with the same brush that I'm using now, and just did very fine lines as I'm doing now, just to give some texture appearance to the hooves, just so that they're not plain Inky by Darkness. You could, I suppose, make them smooth and put some roundish highlights on them, as you know, similar to you would if you were doing sort of armour or something like that. But I wanted just a bit more of a bone texture look to it. And then the same with the front claws. I did the Sotek Green coming up the claw from the point, and now with the Arcanum Blue I'm just going again from the point, working up. As I said, apologies for the poor camera quality on this one, guys. It's a larger model than I have been using before, and or painted before, and the camera space just didn't want to allow for it, and I don't have anything else that I could attach the camera mount to. So obviously just edge highlighting and picking off points and everything with this Arcanum Blue. So obviously, yeah, it's all along the hooves, the claws, the hair, and you know, the tufts and things like that. But we'll jump on and take a look at what I do next. Right, so at this stage the Gryph charger itself is pretty much done. I also went in with the yellow, the Iriel yellow, and dotted in the eyes. And I'm now taking this Cantor blue, and to get it to fit in with the rest of the models I've painted in previous videos, we are going with the golden blue armour. I cannot remember the name of these guys, but yeah, it's the golden blue standard typical box art guys. So obviously this blue, we paint any cloth with it, the outside of any of the cloth, with the exception to obviously the red section that we did, and then the inside areas will do to look white or very whitish grey. So obviously being careful not to go on to any of the pink that I've already done. I do it a couple of times. You know, I'm not perfect, but it's not a problem, because I only ever touch sort of areas that are shadow related. It's easy enough to go back in with a slightly darker version of the pink that should be there, and just pull that back into what it should be. So with this, I do start with just having the outside of this lined, but later on I decide that rather than having the under area the same white as the inside of the cloth, I decide to go in and do blue under there instead, and have that blue trim just go on the underside slightly. Now with blue, it's one of those colours that you can get down, you know, thin it down slightly and get it on with 2 layers. It's a, you know, it's a nice easy opaque colour. So yeah, basically that's all I do, is just go around the model and apply a couple of thin down coats to get it to a nice opaque Cantor blue. Okay, so once I've got the blue base down, I now take some Balthazar gold and go in and paint all of the, obviously the gold areas. I know I've done character models previously with non-metallic gold or non-metallic metal gold effect. I have only done it a handful of times, and I'm not overly happy with the results that I've had before. So I've started doing my characters with true metallic metals. I just feel that I get a better result with it. So using a couple of different golds with a Reikland Flesh Shade wash and some silver for highlights, I feel that I do get a nicer gold effect. So obviously all the armour of the knight himself, or the Lord, sorry, as well as the front breastplate of the Gryph charger, and then all of these little emblems and symbols on the side of the chainmail area. Now I do change the center area of these symbols to a red ruby type color, or some sort of red gem, but for now I'm just going over all of it with the Balthazar gold, just to get a nice base down. Also the staff that he's holding, the bottom section that just touches the cloth there, will be gold, as well as the symbol on the very top of the staff. And I also go in and paint his helmet whilst it's removed from the model, just by holding the plumage at the top and going in and painting the helmet. The plumage I can then paint once the helmet is affixed to the model. Alright, and next I take some Abaddon black, and I'm going to use this for the sort of the leather black straps, the saddle, the Lord Arcanum's gauntlets, and also the chainmail part of the Gryph charger here. So the sort of the armor diamond plate that you can see just along the side there, as well as the small strap buckle that attaches the breastplate to the blue cloth. That's this little piece here. So what I would like to see, guys, if you are collecting the magazine, jump up onto my Discord, which you can find the link for down in the description there, and you know, let me see what you guys are doing. You know, show me some photos of your models or your armies, with, you know, how far you're in so far. If it's not Mortal Realms related, then you know, throw it up anyway. It'd be interesting and nice to see what you guys are doing. And if there are, like I always say, if there are any requests, if any of you guys want to see anything in a bit more detail, you know, let me know, and I'll see what I can get up for future videos. Just showing here the areas that I do in black, and then we'll jump on to the next stage. So obviously it's the rain around the Gryph charger's head, and the small bit straps around the vials that he has on the side here, and then obviously the back of his knees as well. And then we'll jump on, and once that's done, we'll start on with, I believe it is the silver. Okay, so next up I take some iron breaker, and this is going to be for all my silver plating. Let's see, the diamond plate mail armor, as well as any sort of belt buckles and the staff for the Lord Arcanum staff. So again, here you can see I'm applying it to this area with sort of a straight down stroke, and what this does is leave a slight shadow recess area right as you step down from the layer above, or the row above, and it's almost like an automatic shadow area. So obviously painting the buckle here, and then the small emblem on the side of the leather strap here, either side of the head. And I later on decide to have the thunderbolts on the breastplate there done as well. So if you're following along or using this for ideas, I do recommend at this stage to put that thunderbolt in with the silver. It makes it stand out just a little bit more. I felt that it looked too flat with being the same colour as the breastplate itself. But obviously you can go in and do it however you want. So yeah, we'll jump on and take a look at the shading for the gold and the silver here. Okay, so for the next two steps of shading, we're going to take some non-oil and some Reikland Flesh Shade Gloss. Now, first of all, taking the non-oil, I just apply this as a straight heavy wash over all of the silver metallic areas. So I'm just using a standard regiment brush from Army Painter here. Nothing special, nothing huge, just enough to pick up some of that wash out of the lid, and then apply it straight down to the metal here. Obviously doing the same for the little belt buckles and the staff itself, the silver section of the staff. Right, and with the Reikland Flesh Shade Gloss, this just goes all over the gold areas. Just a you know, a wash, getting it into those recesses, sort of splodging it on, and then pushing it around with the brush to get it into the gaps and those sort of sunken in areas. Now the lid on my pot here does not like to stay up, so I do have to hold it up with my finger and then pull some of the wash out of the lid with the bristles. But yeah, just a straightforward wash on this really. You know, same as you would do any other wash. Just get it on the bristles, throw it on, slap it in, get it down into those recesses. You don't want any puddles or anything on any flat areas. Just get a nice smooth glaze over that, and then that's that all done. Right, and the final shade that I use is Drakenhof Nightshade, and obviously this is for all of the blue areas. So again, just the same with any wash, nice even coats straight down any flat surfaces. Don't let it pool up on those flat surfaces, but do let some of it settle down into those recesses, and you know, you've got instant shadows in a pot. So obviously, like I said, this goes over all of the blue areas, concentrating it in the recesses. So I'll just apply this and we'll jump back once that has dried. Right, now to start working on the inside of the cloak and that. So for this we're going to use, or I use some Dawnstone, and again slightly thinned down. This is very similar to the undercoat that I've already got on there, but as you can see, you know, I got a little bit messy with some of that blue. So more than anything, this is to just neaten that up, but it does make sure that I've got a nice even coat there. This will be my darkest shade within the cloak. It is going to work up to an almost white, so I go in with this and just make sure that everything is neat, ready for those next layers of highlights. So this is used on any of the underside of the blue cloth. So if it's blue on one side, it's grey white on the inside. Okay, so now to start highlighting the blue cloth. So for this I take some Calidor Sky, which is my go-to brighter layer for Cantor Blue. Again, I think it works well with this. Thin it down to almost a glaze consistency, and just start building those layers up. Obviously leaving that darkest recess down in the depths, and then just having those flatter surfaces and peaks with this brighter colour. Now I do mix backwards and forwards with this a little bit between this and the Cantor Blue to get a bit more of a smooth transition. But essentially it's just a case of, like I say, layering up. I wanted a bit more of a stark contrast with this than I would normally go. Normally I would go for glazes and smooth those transitions right out. But I think this time I just wanted a little bit more of sharper edges, sharper highlights, almost that sort of over the top Games Workshop style highlights that you see on all their box art models. I just felt for this piece, with the softer edges of the Gryph charger, and then those harder edges of the Lord and the cloaks and that, you've got very sort of sharp creases. I just wanted to get a bit of a contrast between the two types of highlights. So like I say, it's just I just basically build it up to you know, as bright as I want it. Again, I don't ever go fully opaque to the highlight colour. I always leave it slightly short, with exception to the hardest edges. I'll do that almost opaque, and then that's where the final highlight colour will go against anyway. So I'll just apply this to, like I say, all the blue areas, and we'll be back in just a tick. Right, and for my sharp edge highlights, I like to use Techless Blue. So again, this isn't so much thinned down, just a small amount of water added to the mix just to get it to flow easier. But this will be edge highlighted all around the blue areas. So using the side of the brush here, I'm just going around and picking off anywhere where the outermost edges are. I do go back in later and very finely highlight this again to get that Games Workshop sharp edge highlight style. And you can see I'm just taking across the top of anywhere that's going to be on those rounded edges, and up those verticals and right along those edges. I do go a little bit wide with these, but that's because I know that I've still got one more layer of sharp highlighting to put in over the top of this. So we'll jump on ahead and take a look at that next area. Okay, so next up I move back to the inside of the cloak and taking some Ulth1 Grey. I go ahead and obviously thin this down slightly and just apply this to any of the raised flat surfaces, leaving the recesses in that Dawnstone Grey. And obviously the Dawnstone then gives a little bit of shadow. If there's an area like this that has just a slight shallow recess, then I'll usually go in and fill that in with the lighter colour as well. And then when I add the third highlight, that will just be on the higher curved section. But otherwise, everything else will usually be left with the deeper recess. So you can see just there I left that whole inner area under the cloak that would be in shadow with the Dawnstone there. What I may do sometimes as well, if I think that the contrast between the two is too great, is just thin down the Ulth1 a little bit more and just run that in some of the shadow area just to lighten it up ever so slightly. But obviously I do this for any of the remaining inside cloak area, so any of the grey areas. And that'll be it for the cloaks. Okay, and using that same Ulth1 Grey, I'm now going to go in and highlight any of the black areas. I did go in with some of the Dawnstone and just do a slightly wider highlight previous to this, and I'm now going in and just doing that sharp edge detailing to really make those edges pop out. So very carefully with a fine lining brush here, just edge lining. I'm using the point of the brush on this area as it's not a sharp edge, it's a slightly beveled edge, whereas anywhere that has a sharp edge where I can use the side of the brush, then obviously I'll use the brush sideways to line that detail. And again, it does help if you have the paint thinned down slightly, as it will flow off the brush better, but do be careful not to have it too thin, otherwise it's just going to run down into the recesses and not sit on those raised edges. And you'll note that I went ahead and applied some Teclis blue to the two vials on the side there, and they're ready for a quick bit of highlight. I didn't need to put too much detail into those, they're just a couple of small instruments on the side there. Okay, so I'll now take some Screamer Pink, and this is going to be applied to the textured grip section of the staff here, as well as the plumage on his helmet. What I do with the plumage is paint it again as I did with the helmet, paint that separate. I don't mind holding it by the helmet once the paint is on there, as the paint shouldn't come off if you've got a decent undercoat on there. But if it does, then all I'll do, once the plumage is dry, I'll then hold that again, paint the helmet, and then glue the helmet into place, and then just touch up any of the plumage, as it will be easier to get to rather than trying to touch up the helmet once it's glued in place. So very simply just applying this up the shaft and on the plumage, and we'll be back in just a sec. Okay, and now to highlight the armour, I'm going to use some Retributor armour, and this is obviously going to be for the majority of the armour, any of the brighter areas. So just staying away from those edges and any dipped areas, any sort of under areas where the light won't reach. And what this will do is use the Balthazar Gold as a shadow, and then the Retributor armour being the main armour colour. So obviously very similar to edge highlighting, just the same way as if you were using any kind of matte paint, but without the hassle of non-metallic metal, of trying to get it to look like metal. It just makes it stand out a little bit more than the straight up, if I was to do this with just straight up Retributor armour. So you can see there that we've got some nice shadow going on now with the Balthazar Gold. Obviously any flat surfaces will be painted with the gold. Now you can see here that I'm concentrating this more towards the top. I do thin down the paint a little bit here. I think I actually rinsed the brush so I could feather this out and concentrate it more towards the top of that curved armor plate. And then here you can see where I'm using the paint, the excess paint that I just picked up, and using that thinned out so I get a bit more of a gradient with the gold. Now you'll notice with the his right shoulder pauldron, so the one that's currently toward the top of the model there, I forgot that that's actually blue in that center area, the main pauldron part of it, with a gold trim. So later on I will go in and apply the blue in the exact same way that I did with the cloth. So just painting the gem up there, and the area that I remember is supposed to be blue, and then I think at this point I realised that that's supposed to be blue, not gold, and I want the gems red, not gold, and so I left out the remaining gems and the other side of that pauldron and just went about applying this gold to, like I say, anywhere where the sun would reach. So with the edge of the pauldrons, the trim, I usually do the flat area and then the raised curved part that reaches up to the peak, and then leave the corner areas in that darker shadow. So you got the darker shadow in the corners with the light gold either side of it. Right, so next I'm going to take some Evil Sun's Scarlet, and this is going to highlight all of the red cloth area. So obviously it's just a small area here. You'll notice just on the bottom of that cloth there, that little grey area, that part there I'm just covering now, that's where I've been holding the model, because this is too large for the model grip, the stand. I've been holding it just at the base area there, which obviously wears the paint off slightly. As long as you're careful to hold this model in an area that you can repaint over easily, then if the paint does rub off a little bit, then it's not too much trouble to paint up. So you can see the painting handle there still attached, but I do remove that later on to get a bit of a better grip. It was just too big a model. I've got this held onto that with blue tack underneath, and it's too big a model to try and hold with that grip, especially in the small camera filming space that I've got. But all I'm doing with this again is just edge highlighting and then going down either side of the edge slightly. This isn't the final highlight there will be another red layered over the top of this, so this is just to catch sort of the main areas of the cloth, the flat areas, but leaving those deeper recesses in with that darker red, that deeper red. Right, and whilst I have this red out, it's also at this point that I go over all of these sort of diamond pieces on the emblems or decals, whatever you want to call them. So again, just apply this straight red over the top. I will apply some shadow and highlight to this in a little bit, mixing up some Mephiston red and some Abaddon black to get a deeper shadow, and then some Mephiston red for the mid-tone, but I'll explain that when we get there. So we'll now jump on and take a look at the next step. Right, so I'm now just taking that Mephiston red and applying that to three sides of the diamonds, leaving that top left side in the Evil Sun Scarlet, and this will provide the shadow. And then what I would also do, once this is done, mix a small amount of black just to darken up the red slightly, and apply that to the bottom right triangle portion of the diamond, and this will give you your three tones for your for the diamonds. So obviously you've got your deepest shadow, your mid-tone, which I like to have the two opposite portions the same, and then your lightest tone being the one opposite your darkest. So it's obviously split into four. You've got top left light, bottom right dark, and then bottom left and top right being the mid-tone. And I feel that this gives a nice sort of 3-point or 4-point colour. It gives it more of a 3D effect. Okay, so moving on to the final edge highlighting of the gold areas, I'm now going to take some Stormhost Silver, and you'll note that I've removed the model from the painting handle at this point, as it was getting a little bit annoying. So this is just for edge highlighting the trim here, and just picking off sort of those very fine points where the light would just pick up. So obviously with this being a rounded surface on the shoulder pads here, there's just a very small highlight on the top. Also dotting in all of the studs on the armour. Usually what I'll do is apply this to corners where 2.2 or more points will meet, as obviously that's going to reflect the most light, and then feather that off as it comes away from that point. I'll also do it on the uppermost area of a curve, so obviously the middle section of that there. Now this is where I started doing the highlighting on these lightning bolts and decided that no, that doesn't look right. They need to be in a silver to make them stand out more. So I do end up going back in and painting those in silver. So obviously I do this around all of the gold, getting that nice highlight on there. And you'll also notice that I'm leaving the model flat down on the surface and using my left hand as a support for my right hand. I find that this makes it easier for lining fine details, as the only hand that can shake then is the one with the brush and not the one with the brush and the one with the model. And because I'm using my left hand as support for the right hand, there's even less chance of the brush hand shaking. It just gives a nice steady surface to get those fine edges on. A little bit more difficult to do with smaller models, but for something this size and definitely larger pieces, I find it's easier to do it this way. Obviously you'll have to adjust the model around to get to different positions, but with it being on a flat surface you can get a much finer detail and sharper lines. So next up we've got some a mix 50-50 mix of Techless Blue and White Scar, and I'm going to use this to highlight all of those all of that blue cloth. This will be the same method as I did with the gold with the Stormhost Silver, so just picking off those very outer sharp edges, and again using my left hand as a support for my right hand. Just helps me to bring those very fine lines down the outside edges of the cloth there. And as I mentioned earlier, because of the soft curves and there not being so much sharp edges on the Gryph charge, I wanted to get that more Games Workshop very sort of edge highlighting every sharp edge on the Lord Arcanum and the armour and things like that for the Gryph. So obviously I've had to pick up the model now to change the angle. It's easier to draw vertical lines than it is horizontal. You just angle the model and pull the brush straight down, rather than moving your whole hand across the width of the model. So obviously just going over those really bright areas and then just flowing it ever so slightly down into the shadow area, but not all the way down in there. Obviously this is an edge highlight where the light would catch most, and it's not going to catch down in those deeper recessed areas. So I'll just go on and do this to all of the blue areas, so anywhere that we had that Techless Blue on there, and we'll be back in just a bit. Okay, so now to highlight the red gems, I'm just taking some White Scar and very carefully applying a thin line just from where the 4 points meet, or the four sharp edges meet, into the point at the center, and then just bringing that down slightly, or starting slightly higher and bring it to that point, so it doesn't go right to the outside edge. It's just to highlight that center area, and then I'll place a small dot just in the top left and bottom right portions, just to give that effect of a bit of a reflection in there. You'll also note that the banner that goes around the top of his staff there, I painted that in with Oath 1 grey, and then just washed in some very thin down black to pick out that lettering in there, and then I'll just go back over that with Oath 1 grey. So obviously a different method of highlighting these points here is to use the side of the brush, but I'm not overly happy with that. I think that it puts on a bit too much of a blob, as the edge of it, the sharp edge, isn't away from enough from the flat surfaces, so it tends to pull down the side of the side slightly. So you can see here, just applying a small dot on the surfaces. Okay, so next I'm going to take some pink horror, and I've now applied the helmet and glued it in place, and all I'm going to do with this is just line all of the plumage here with this pink horror. So this is a slightly damped brush, this isn't a full edge highlighting or dry brushing. I did want this to sink into some of the recesses, especially towards the ends of the hair here, as I'll then go in with another lighter mix of this and just use the side of the brush to pick off the very edges as an edge highlight for it. Okay, and with that edge highlighting on the plumage done, I'll now take some Cowbird Crimson and just run that right in there into all of the recesses, and the edge highlighting will obviously stay brighter than the deeper parts or the Screamer Pink, and that'll give a, you know, just an already natural highlight without having to go back in after applying this and putting some more highlight in there. So again, apologies for the poor camera angle here. I will try and sort that out for you guys for any other larger models that I do in the future. Okay, and with that we are all done. So you can see here that I've gone and put him on a custom made base. All I did was with a scalpel just carefully remove the stone that was modelled to his left hoof, and then this base is essentially 3 blue chip slate stone. I just picked some out of my stone collection that I thought would make a nice mount for him, and then I obviously drilled some holes into the stone and to the bottom of his feet and just pinned him down to that after I'd painted it, obviously. If you want to see a tutorial on how to do that, let me know down in the comments below, and I'll do some custom base tutorials focusing on different bases, and you guys can, you know, have a look at those. But apart from that, that's it guys. There he is, a finished Lord Arcanum on Gryph charge. So if you made it this far through the video, I'd like to thank you all for joining me. It is much appreciated, and very humbling that you guys do enjoy watching these videos and sit through them. If you haven't already hit that like button, then please do so, as it will work with YouTube's algorithm on getting the video more notifications, you know, more spotted and people watching it more. If you're not already subscribed, please hit that subscription button and you'll get notifications of further videos. Obviously Mortal Realms Monday being every Monday, focusing on the Mortal Realms magazine, and the Indomitus series is every Wednesday, focusing on the 40k Indomitus boxed set, which will be then expanded into a general Warhammer 40,000 playlist once the Indomitus is done. So with all that said guys, thanks a lot for joining me. Until next time, take it easy and keep painting those minis.